Hi, I'm Mike Henry. And this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call Zola, Queen of the Night. So first things first, I started with a completely different vampire take, which you can see right here. It was originally going to be a dude and kind of follow that classic like urban vampire vibe of the character that's got like the leather jacket and the jeans and the long greasy black hair and all that kind of stuff, which I don't completely dislike this character, and I think this character could definitely see a comeback, not as sort of like this lineup, since this category is more or less checked off, but more as some other character in the lore somewhere. Maybe someone that Zola knows, maybe someone that someone else knows, who knows, but he wouldn't be in this main lineup. I think where we ended up is a lot better. So here I am starting to refine the lines, and then I very quickly am just like, I'm not really loving this, so I start over. Here's where I start over from. I had actually sketched that vampire, I think, like 2 characters ago, and then I sort of put it aside because I knew that I wanted a vampire. I just didn't know how. And my son was constantly saying, like, you need a vampire, you need a vampire. And so at one point, I made Lucy kind of the stand in for the vampire with the fact that she's part lamprey. But then I started thinking it would actually be kind of fun if there were 2 blood drinking characters, which is kind of weird. Most of the time in these types of things, there's like one blood drinking character and the other characters are kind of like put off by it or whatever the hell it is. And I just thought it'd be kind of fun if there were 2. Maybe the 2 of them go out and grab like a blood together, a glass of blood or something like that. I don't know. I would hopefully make something that sounds smarter than that, but that's the gist of it, right? Is that having 2 blood suckers I thought would be kind of fun. So once I thought, okay, I'm not going to go after that other guy, let's do something different. I kind of liked that this cast was already pretty female centric, so I just wanted to keep driving that home. So that's how we ended up getting into this exploration right here of this character. So Zola, what I'm gonna do here for this video is I've got the sketch part more slowed down than I normally do, and the color more sped up, because I think the coloring process, we've seen it a million times. If you are new to the channel, just go back through any of the recent videos and you'll start finding exactly how I colored this. So I'm not going to talk about it at all. I'm going to keep to my word that I'm not going to talk about it at all. All I'm going to do is I'm going to say that select paint, select clear is the main method by which I kind of organize things, which I will link down in the description below. And if you go back a few videos, you can see where I talk about how I do layer management, and all my recent videos talk about the process. There, I'm done. Oh yeah, and the brushes are linked in the description below as well. So instead what I'll do is talk more about the design of the character. So you can see here I'm starting with no clothes on the character. The reason is because I just really wanted to nail the pose. Some people talk about how to get clothing right and how to get anatomy right and all these different things. If in fact I'm not doing something where the clothing really takes over the form of the character, this is how I do it. I essentially draw like a doll first. I get the body type exactly how I want it, assuming that my characters would wear different types of clothes. It would be good to know what they look like underneath so that you can put the different clothes on top of them in the right way. This allows you to also now have this sort of basic body that you could then test different outfits on. As you know, with this way that I do art on here, it's all for me and I don't have to give any kind of options. I just make the decisions on the page. However, if you can create that sort of base doll body, you can then try many iterations. If you are working in a studio and you are trying to solve this character for a director or a game designer or whomever it is, a writer, that's how you're going to want to go about doing it. You're going to want to get that base body done first, duplicate like 20 of them on a canvas, and then just start banging out a bunch of different costumes. Now, I've talked about this in the past. That's costume design, not necessarily character design. I think that that's also part of the exercise. I'm just saying that if you want to provide a lot of variations, that would be a good way to do it. That's usually how I do it. So for the case here, I wanted to get her pose right. I wanted to get her body type right, and I wanted to try and figure out how I was then going to costume her. And I thought, like, right away, I was like, okay, flat top with a fade. I think that's going to look super cool. I also think that putting her in sort of like the female version of that other guy's outfit would also kind of be cool. And that's how the whole thing got sparked from that point on. And then she's holding like this little bat, like hanging from her finger. At first, you can see here the bat is looking at us, and then I turn it to looking at her just because it's more interesting. So now we're into the coloring, which is going to go pretty quickly, but I wanted to talk about the colors I chose here. So she is blue. The way that I would treat vampires in this world is that they do not maintain their skin color. She is actually a born vampire, though. She was not turned. So that is an interesting distinction with her. I'll get into that in a second. But in this universe, as a way to sort of keep those colors alive and keep all of these characters with these really intense palettes and everything, I just think it would be really cool. It's like literally like a vampire sinks their teeth into you, and you're like, and your normal color, and then like you fall to the ground, and whatever the rules are around them turning you, if it's literally you just get bit or they have to do something more, then it's like your skin goes like and you turn blue. Depending on your skin tone, it might be different, or depending on like the family of vampire, whatever it is. And this is undecided, but I just think it'd be kind of be cool if you see like a lineup of vampires and they're all like different shades of like blue, blue, green kind of thing. That would just be like some are a little more gray, some are a little paler, some are a little darker, some are a little more blue, some are, I just think that would be really fun. But keep them all in sort of a general palette so they feel really good. Now let me explain this character. Oh, before I explain the character, I should highlight that here's where I'm doing the color keys again, which is something that I've talked about doing more recently. I actually just did it on the next character. I've got a villain that I'm doing. He's a hunter. He's like a monster hunter. So he'll be coming soon. I've actually had him flatted for a few days now, but I've been more interested in doing some other things. Like the next piece after this that I'll post is just basically like the headshot of a girl, and so that's the next one, and then we get into more complicated full body stuff after that again. But anyways, getting back to the main gist of this character, the sort of like idea I have behind this character is that she is from a long line. I wouldn't say it's a vertically long line of vampires. Her grandfather is a very prominent, well-known vampire, and there are laterally, I guess you could say, in her family tree, lots of vampires. She's kind of like, I wouldn't say that I've figured it out this, but let's just say like the world has like 3 huge houses of vampires, and then all other vampires are just kind of like rando vampires, and she would be one of those houses. You could say that. She doesn't really like being a part of it. It's not that she's like super rebellious. It's more that she's just kind of like, I don't need that kind of noise in my life, and so she doesn't really... She tries not to participate in it, but it's like every city she goes to, every corner she turns, she's running into somebody that's like, hey, Zola, I haven't seen you, and she's like, ugh, and she just tries to kind of avoid it in general. She doesn't really like the responsibility, but it's not one of those things where she's outright rejecting it like a Disney princess or some shit, where she's just like, I want a bigger life, and then she starts singing or some shit. It's more just like an apathetic, like, yeah, I don't really need that right now. Her abilities, I haven't talked that much about abilities of characters in the past because they've all been kind of clear. They've all been just kind of like fighter types. She's actually like a telekinetic and a telepath. So she can do a few things. I mean, you could sort of think of her like if you took like Jean Grey, if we want to talk American comic books for a minute, if you took like Jean Grey and Psylocke and kind of mixed their abilities together, you're kind of starting to approximate what she can do. Vampires, depending on the lore that you're into, usually have all these abilities, right? Like they can turn into a wolf, or they can turn into bats, or they can turn into mist, or they can control people with their mind, or they could glamour people, or like there's like a whole list of like vampires get to do this shit. In this world, it's similar. Vampires kind of almost have like a subclass, to use video game terms. So it's like class vampires, subclass telekinetic. Like that's the way she would be, kind of thing. And that's why she has those little red, pink, like sort of like laser wings, because her abilities, part of her abilities is that she forms kind of like shapes out of this telekinetic energy that she then uses to do things, to either do harm or to solve a problem or to grab a thing or whatever. So she's pretty powerful in that way. She does not do the Jean Grey horseshit of like getting overwhelmed and like passing out, but there is some degree of limitation to her powers. She's not like Green Lantern where she can do like literally anything and just destroy everyone. She's not allergic to yellow or whatever. Her weakness isn't yellow. But she is, she does have some sort of a limit to it, which is just more or less general fatigue. It just doesn't end with her passing out and being like, oh, Scott, and then like falling down or something like that. So it's more like, it's more, actually, let's keep going with comic books. I guess you could say it'd be more like Jubilee, where she goes to do the thing and it just kind of like fizzles out when like Jubilee's learning how to use her powers or whatever. It'd be more like that. Like she'd do all this crazy cool shit and then she'd go to do it and like a pink spark would come out and she'd be like, ah, shit. And then she would just try to like fight hand to hand or run away or whatever it is. So that's the idea behind this character. As I've said before, I don't really know if this is like a team. I would probably like to keep it from being such a simple kind of like construct of they're all part of some sort of like monster team. But let's just say that like in amongst the cast, she would fill a kind of interesting route. She would have a lot of affinity towards Lucy, as I mentioned before. They would probably be amicable, and she would probably, I don't know, she would probably dismiss characters like the plant guy because his priorities don't feel very real to her. She would probably be a little bit at odds with Hazel, and she would probably be kind of like neutral towards Larry and the Giselle. So that's kind of where I see her fitting into the whole thing. Now, the next character that I've got coming is actually after her. He is a monster hunter in general, but he has felled a few members of her family, and he is after her now because he has reasons to come after her. I'll get to him when I post him, but let's just say that her family is responsible for something bad in his life, and not something like old school, like killed his family or something like that, something more relating directly to him, and he's kind of after her because he holds her responsible even though she has nothing to do with it. So it's kind of one of those things where like, if we were going to go with like a stereotypical scene, it's like she's in New York City at some club, she leaves late at night or something like that, and then this guy's like following her, and then he attacks her, and then she's all like, what's your deal, man? And he's all like, you know my deal, and then like tries to like kill her. I don't know, the usual bullshit. So he's after her. She doesn't completely know why. He's got a reason, etc., etc. It just writes itself, right? You just come up with this stuff, and then you've got like a movie. Slam dunk. So the character design of her, I've already sort of described why her clothing is the way it is, that I was trying to key off of that kind of like, I mean, there's an 80s vibe to it, absolutely. It's sort of like an 80s neon urban vibe to her. And it's similar to what the guy would have been if I did the guy. He would have had like black hair and been pale, and he would have been wearing like leather and been 80s inspired in some way. She's much more, because her fashion is much more in line with like a late 80s kind of vibe. So that is the spirit of her design. Now her actual colors, the reason why her colors are the way they are. So some people have asked to talk more about colors. I won't do like a deep color dive right now. I am going to do a video where I just review all of these characters and how they work together and where the thought process is. At least that's the plan right now. But what I'll just sort of lightly touch on right now is that my thought process with her is that I wanted her to be very monochromatic. The other characters kind of are too, but a lot of the other characters are kind of a little more naked than she is. Like Larry and Hazel and Ansel are kind of like all like naked, and then Giselle and Lucy are more clothed. And so then she was going to be clothed too, but I wanted her to have less colors going on than like Giselle and Lucy. I wanted her to be more like those original couple of characters. So she's all monochromatic. She's blue. Her skirt is purple, but it's dark and it's close to blue. It's like a blue purple. Her jacket is blue but dark. And then it was like, okay, so for her like top, I was gonna say costume. For her top, I wanted a color that popped like crazy. because I wanted to really, since she's blue and her jacket's blue and everything's blue, I really wanted to emphasize the crop top jacket and just make that as like clear as possible and get like a really fun tangy color in there kind of. And then once I had that all kind of in, it was like, oh well, of course the wings and the eyes and like all that shit has to be this like crazy hot pink, because this whole thing is basically cool. You've got the green. Green is like a cool warm. Depending on which way it goes, it's like a bridge color. So I made that like really intense, but it is technically analogous to the blue. And so then it was like, okay, let's get something that just feels like really warm, just really hot in there. And that's where the pink comes from in order to really play with that. If you're sort of looking at your general color schemes, a lot of what I do is split complementary. That's like a common thing that I go for. I'll also go for like tetradic pretty often. If you're looking at this, you can kind of, I mean, it's really hard to say. Like if you look at this character and you kind of plot out her colors across a color wheel, it's essentially like a whole, just like half of the color wheel. Now granted, we only dip into purple a little bit for that skirt. Otherwise you could say that it's like it's basically split complementary, but it's not a perfect split complementary. So that like whole logic to that is really, this one is more stretching the notion of some of these arrangements, as opposed to like really saying like this is very distinctly this color, because it's definitely not. Or excuse me, this color scheme, I guess. Color harmony. I also want to highlight that the bat is a weird color. If you actually were to color pick that, he's like a green, but it's like desaturated and kind of dark, so it's falling a bit into that brown realm. And then I pink it up just a little bit by highlighting where his wings are once we actually get to figuring out his flats a little bit more. He's not completely flatted at this point. I wait until I define his ambient occlusion, or not, no, yes, sorry, ambient occlusion, before I actually, put that extra definition, like his teeth and his nose and his wings into there. One thing that I want to mention that was just a tweak that I don't normally do. Well, one thing, there's two things that I think are kind of interesting to point out. One is the metal. The metal in this is a really dark, like greenish metal. I will frequently make my metals kind of green, but they're usually much brighter. I just wanted to go with this like dark vibe. In fact, to some degree, I think it'd be kind of cool if this character was like almost always lit, like those old movies where they just put like the reflected light like across the eyes and the rest is like in dark. I think that'd be cool. I kind of like the idea of her almost like bringing a darkness with her wherever she goes. It's not that she is a heavy foreboding presence. It's more of just like a casual darkness that always follows her. And so I like the idea. I almost think of it like, actually that would be kind of funny. It's like if somebody gave her like something to try on, like a jacket or a shirt or a hat or something like that. It's like it'd be like, let's say it'd be like white, and they would hand it to her, and as soon as she like takes it from them, it becomes almost like a gray blue or something, and then she puts it on. So I kind of like the notion of her having almost this darkening aura, and so that metal is part of that. And then some colors obviously just wouldn't be affected because it just would make it be cooler looking if they weren't. Part of that would be her shirt. One thing I want to point out here is you'll notice that the shadows on her shirt are darker than they end up in the final. The way that I end up doing that is I duplicate her shirt layer. I just want to mention this now. You'll be able to see it when it actually happens. But what I do is I duplicate her shirt layer, I move it to the top, and then I erase away everything from the jacket and the zipper. And then it's basically a green flat that's sitting on top of all of the shadows, and then I lower its opacity. So I'm lowering the green and bringing the shadow up a bit. And that's because I wanted it to have a little bit of a self-illuminating vibe to it, like that neon material can be, but I didn't want it to like glow. I didn't want it to be glowy. So instead, it's just got a self-illumination, but it doesn't have any type of a bloom or a glow to it. And that's because once I did all the shadowing, I actually just felt like on the shirt it was too dark. It went from too bright to too dark, and I was losing that sort of again, that sort of glowy neonness of that shirt, and so that's why I decided to do that. One thing I should note that's not in the illustration yet, but is in there by the time the whole piece is done, is her earring. While I do like the cleanliness of her right arm having no jewelry and her neck having no jewelry, and I think that that's good, by the time I was done with it, I was like, actually, though, I feel like she should have an earring. And so since she's got this 80s vibe, I just thought it'd be fun to kind of riff off of the fact of like that 80s cross earring, but since she's a vampire, it's just upside down. So I just thought that was kind of a fun little thing to add at the very end. So you'll see that coming in. Actually, you'll see it coming in right at the very end. I had some last minute tweaks on this. That's, again, I always talk about how I like to save out my piece when it's done and just stare at it for like a couple of days. I will even set it as like my background on either my iPad or my phone so that I'm just always looking at it. And then that sort of thing that artists have where you get sick of your work. If I'm getting sick of certain things enough, or I feel like I've noticed something that I should have put in, I'll go ahead and throw that in there. And that's a good way to just sort of sit with your art for a couple of days. Like a painter who works on a painting in their studio, that piece is like there, right? It's always physically there, and they'll see it as they walk past it. Maybe they'll put it to the side, or maybe they'll actually deliberately set it up and just stare at it for a bit. And I think that that's important. And in digital art, because our stuff isn't physical, we usually devalue it and stick it in some file, some folder somewhere, and we never see it. And so I think putting it on things where you're going to have to see it all the time is a good way for you to process things and figure out whether or not it's got everything in it that you need it to, and then apply those changes if you think that it doesn't. That said, I am a big fan of moving on with your life. I am a big fan of not taking too long on any piece. Take the right amount of time, and if you're into this point where you're starting to noodle tons of little details, if that's not the job, then it's probably time to move on. So I say if you think something's done, throw it up as like your phone or your computer or your iPad, whatever you're on. Throw it up as your wallpaper for a couple of days, and then if you haven't changed anything on it, go ahead and post it. At this point, I'm liking the vibe of the piece, but I wanted to get a little bit more of the color bumped up. I wanted her to just be vibrantly dark. So here you can see I make the belt and her bracelet brighter. I should say actually more saturated. I don't think it actually goes brighter at all. And then I think that might be the only color that I actually tweak here. Something else that I want to call out is her eyes. In the rough sketch, I liked the way her eyes looked, but as time went on, I wasn't really into it. You can see here she has regular pupils at some points in this. Oh, here I am doing the bat now. At some point she has like elongated pupils, not exactly cat eyes, but more like a, I don't know, they're a little bit more rounded kind of. But anyways, I changed that a few times throughout, and then end up at the end of everything going with nothing there basically, and just going with this more glowy sort of I don't know, less specific but glowy eye, and I think that that ends up being the right way to go. So you'll see that the direct shadow is being applied, which means that in a minute we're going to see that shirt get duplicated. It's coming any minute now. Just stare at her shirt, and in a second you're going to see, there we go. So that was me duplicating it, clearing away all of the mess because it was now on top, and then lowering its opacity. And so now you can see that the contrast from its highest point to its shadow is the distance is much shorter than, for instance, on her skin to that cast shadow, where it gets really dark. It doesn't get as dark on the shirt. That's just to try and make it a little self-illuminating. The way that I did her stockings is the same way that I did the transparency in the last video. If you go back, you'll find it when I was establishing the flats, but I basically painted the legs and then duplicated it, erased away the middle section with like a soft eraser, and then adjusted the opacities of those two layers and then merged them together. That way, just like with the transparency of the Jelly Girl, as the leg rounds off into the distance, you're technically accumulating more density of the visual density of the stocking, and then that's how you're getting that sort of darkening, that extra darkening that happens around the leg. And so that's how that was done. You can see here the shines applied across. This is using like a blue. This girl has the same lighting scheme as all the other characters in the series, a purple shadow and a blue highlight, trying to keep everything very sort of like cool and eerie. And oh, one other thing I should call out is the reason why her eyes are red and that bat's eyes are red, if it wasn't clear, is that she's in control of that bat, basically. Like they're communicating / in control, connected in some way. I've said it before and I'll say it again, wrangling some of these colors can be a real pain in the butt, so sometimes these colors of the backgrounds get changed a lot. The backgrounds are definitely less important than the characters, so I try to make sure I'm reconciling the characters first and foremost, and then we address the backgrounds afterwards. Now, if I end up I think that I have to pick the right background color to really set up the character well, but I think the point is more like I wouldn't change the background because her shirt's green. Like if I wanted to make the background green and then I was like, oh, but now the shirt has to be a color I don't want it to be, then the background's not going to be green. So trying to find that right color that really sets everything off is pretty interesting. I also think something that's really fun, just to kind of see how it goes, fun, sometimes frustrating, funstrating, is that with this one, for instance, I go with a red background and her glow is red. In previous characters, I've kind of tried to find ways for those two things to be really separate. Like, for instance, on Lucy, it's not like a yellow glow with a yellow background. But with her, I needed to make sure, I wanted like the vampire, the like blood red vampire vibe to sort of come out. So I ended up eventually taking the background red, which is funny because her wings are red and you'd think that whole thing would just hide it, but the thing is her wings are located so high in the illustration, and that's where the darkest parts of the background are, so it still completely works. In a second, we're actually going to see the background change to that red, and you can see how dramatically the mood changes in this image. So now we've gone from blue to purple, which the blue felt like it was definitely kind of her environment. The purple really kind of didn't, but you could tell that I was fighting between making it red and hiding the glow or making it blue and hiding her. So I went somewhere in the middle with purple, although that felt really soft. It didn't feel like it was a really strong decision. And now here with the red background, we see something that I think is a little bit more extreme and intense. This is the point where I deemed the piece done and then said, oh, nope, let's get this earring put in. So you see all the layers start to flick off for a second because I have to come in and start inserting this in the right place, which is in the flats folder. And then I turned off everything except for the shadows and some of those effects just so I could see like where the ear ended. Otherwise it would all just be blue. And now that I've got the earring flatted in there and the other two piercings flatted in there, now we can start basically going through those layers and applying the lighting to the earring. Just going through in the exact same pattern of everything else, and since this is on top of all of the other flats, I don't have to worry about it being disruptive or squeezing it in between two layers. And that brings us to the end. Let's flip everything back on. And that right there is the final version of Zola. I really like this character. I've liked all of these characters. I sound like I'm just sort of like tooting my own horn here, but like I'm just feeling like I'm really enjoying myself with them. So I'm going to keep doing them until I run out of ideas. I actually have a character that I really like, but there's something about him that's just not coming together, so I haven't taken him to finish yet. But just in general, I like the characters and I'm going to keep doing more of them. And then at some point, I'm going to start attaching them all together into something more concrete. We're also going to do a lineup review. I promise you that. And that way we can really talk about how all of the characters work together in the same space. Right before I leave you, we're going to take a look at the black and white version of this. I've been doing these sort of like classic monster, quote unquote, versions of them, where I just convert them to black and white. So here's Zola in black and white. I think there's a lot of really cool things about the black and white version that just work really nicely and make her feel like, oh, these characters are, I don't know, these characters are kind of trying to push design buttons, but at the same time they still kind of work well when you do this to them. It makes them feel like they fit that aesthetic as well. So yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys liked more of the backstory, less of the technical stuff this time around, and we'll get back into technical stuff in the next video. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing, all that kind of stuff. Super helps, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.